This time in the Prop Master, we completely paint and attach the thrusters onto the jetpack. We also finish painting the second version of the beacon, and we paint the top of the rocket, as well as a few other things that we really needed to get done so that we could fully assemble the jetpack. And here it is. Or we can take all that and basically just say part B of the last video. You know, we actually kind of set everything in the first part, so let's get to work. Let's go ahead and do some damage to the nozzles and these end caps here. And they're kind of similar to what I've been doing, around this other area. It's just little dings and, nothing substantial, just little dings and chips everywhere. Mostly in these little corner pieces along here. I suspect mostly to help show some detail. Don't be too consistent. I can't remember if this part gets painted, so don't want to do too much there. In fact, the advantage there is I can always, since this is actually metal, I can always go in if it needs to be chipped away there and just scratch it off with the X-Acto. Okay, and then I'm just going to hit a few spots here and there. Nothing too exaggerated. This little seam here would have collected a few dings. Okay. These just need to get a little bit around the corners. Okay, now we can let this all dry and then do some real painting. I've already done this one, so let's just go ahead and I'll show you how to do this one right here. Now, obviously the first thing is, I hope you remembered to paint these when you painted the white and gray on the jetpack. Because if you haven't, you need to do that first. And then before I painted it, I masked off just that center little piece in the middle there. And then painted it with the two colors, and now we can go ahead and mask the rest of this off. Now the problem comes in the fact that this is a cone, and so it makes it very difficult to tape things off because it's obviously tapered and smaller at the top than at the bottom. But luckily this really thin 1/4 inch tape or 6mm tape is really small enough that it doesn't make that much of a deal. And I'm going to start off by just taking some of this tape, and I'm just going to line it up with the very bottom edge and go all around the bottom. And I'm only worried about making sure this bottom edge of the tape lines up with the bottom edge of the thruster. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and push the tape down everywhere. And I'm doing it by starting at the bottom, just kind of rolling my finger up. I don't want to go sideways and kind of take the risk of folding some of that tape over to make a dip. So now I'm taking this thicker tape, which is 18mm. It's 3/4 inch tape. And once again, I'm only worried about this bottom edge. I want the bottom edge of this to line up as close to perfect with the top edge of this tape here. And I'm only concerned with that bottom edge. I don't want to mess up the other rest of the tape, but right now I just want to concentrate on getting that to line up. Okay, next, once again, I want to flatten this tape up by going from the bottom to the top. And you can see that makes a pretty rough edge, but I'm not really concerned with that as masking, as just as a sort of a marker, I guess, is what I'll call it. Now I can take some of my blue tape, which I think is an inch in size, but it doesn't have to be an inch. It can be whatever size you have. And I'm going to line it up with the top of this as smoothly as I can, which means if I have a big dip right there, for instance, I'm not going to try to get down into that area. I'm going to try to transition as smoothly as possible from sort of this area to that area. But I'm roughly going to line this up with the top. Now I can flatten this out good. And now I can go back and remove this 3/4 of an inch piece of tape. And I'm going to go ahead and do that one more time with this tape. Just overlap. I'm not really concerned at all with lining anything up on this row. I just want to make this a little bit thicker. Now I'm going to take some of this brown paper, which is masking paper, but you could use anything, including paper towels if you wanted to. I'm going to take some of this thicker blue tape, but like I said, any tape you have will work as long as it's not too thin. I just want to lay this down carefully so that it doesn't all curl up. Oh, I'm just going to lay this down over that about halfway. Doesn't have to be perfect as long as it has plenty of tape to stick. Okay, so now I have some paper that will stick to this, and kind of stick it roughly over the middle of the taped area. And it's not going to go smoothly because it's got this weird shape up above. It's not, a smooth round shape. And you could use a plastic bag like I did earlier in the build. It works just as well. Okay, once we've gone all the way around, I can let it ride up here. Make sure that your tape is stuck down all over. Okay, and they're not quite finished because we have these little bits in between your cutouts, which you want to be 1/4 of an inch wide or 6 millimeters. And I'm using this 6 millimeter tape. And you basically just want to line it up with the fronts and the sides. So if you have your piece here, you just want to line it up with that center piece and put your tape running straight up and down here, and then also here, right directly in the middle of the back here, and then another one here. You can see I was doing some experimenting on this one. And we're going to do the same thing with this piece here. It's harder to see once you've done that, so you should probably, if you're not working on an actual piece that has these cut out in there, you want to do this part before you mask off the top, obviously. Take your time and make sure this lines up right in the middle and is as close to 90 degrees to the bottom as possible. I suppose one thing you could do would be to take something that had 90 degrees That was close, but I'm a little bit off to the right. That looks pretty good there. Okay, now we're ready to paint these. And then after these sit for an hour, I can peel this paper off and go back and use a brush to paint in the rest of the black. But for now, let's go ahead and paint these black. Okay, and this time I'm going to use the Ultra Matte just so that I can see how this compares. Once I take all the masking off of this, I can see how this compares to the Jet Pack to see how the blacks are really different between this and the matte black, or flat black, I guess it was. And just like before, we're going to do 2 coats about 5 minutes apart, as light as I can make them, which is not very light with this paint. And I'm going to leave that for 5 minutes and we'll put another coat on it. Okay, let's put one more coat on here and then we can let it sit for an hour. Okay, we'll let that dry for an hour and then we can go ahead and take the masking off and see about painting in the rest of the black. Okay, it's been over an hour now, so we can go ahead and unwrap these. Hopefully we don't pull too much of the paint off. The experiment that I did on the other piece was to see how well the paint stuck, and I concluded that I needed to put primer on first, but I totally forgot. I'm definitely losing a fair amount of paint, but I think it's going to be okay. Maybe less okay than I thought. Okay, it looks pretty good, except for all the missing stuff here, so I'll have to deal with that at some point. So what I would suggest you do is you can go ahead and paint the silver the way we did it before, and then mask this part off and put your masking fluid where you want it, and then spray the whole thing with not the filler primer, but with that automotive primer that says wet sandable. You don't have to wet sand it, just use that primer, and then you can paint your white and gray onto that. And by gray, I mean that silver lilac, just like we did on the Jet Pack, and then do like we did here. I'm going to go ahead and pretend that this didn't cause this problem, and I'll deal with that later, not on camera. What I want to do now is go ahead and paint in this area here. And to do that, I've just got my paint. I just want it to match. I started to grab the other black paint, but I want this to match. And I've just got this small roller tray for a paint roller, which you can see I use for this quite a bit. You can actually do this you can spray this into the lid, but it's mostly going to come straight back at you and you can end up painting your finger black. You just want to spray some of that so that there's liquid in there, and then we can go ahead and just paint this in with a brush. And I've noticed this paint tends to be a little bit translucent, so it's probably going to take a couple of layers. It seems to go on a little better if I just kind of tap it onto there. When I try to brush it, it seems to pull off a fair amount of paint. At least for this first layer. Okay, I'll come back. Actually, it looks like in the end I got a pretty good coat on there, so I don't think I'm gonna have to come back and put another layer on. So I guess in an hour I'll come back and I can pull those pieces off and take a look at it. So basically I'll be back in an hour. Okay, so now we can go ahead and take this tape off. And while we were waiting, I went ahead and took the gray paint and the white paint and sort of mixed them together to get this color and brushed it back on to cover up all of those little bits that got peeled up, or stuck to the masking tape earlier. So that looks pretty darn good. And as far as these parts go, until we start doing the messing up, we're pretty much done with them. So we can go ahead and peel up any of the masking fluid areas. Try to be as gentle as I can. Got a stir stick that I've just broken in half. But for the most part, they're easy to see still. These big bubbles here and there. You can tell when you've got an area that has the masking fluid because it sticks and has these little stringy areas where the latex hasn't pulled up yet. If you start to remove your paint and you're not getting any of those little rubbery filaments, or you can't feel the rubber, then there's a good chance that you're just peeling up paint that you didn't mean to peel up, so you can stop. Now we're not completely finished with these because I'm also going to do some painting on the inside here. Okay, those look pretty good. Now, if you didn't go this route and you're going more the route where you built everything from scratch, let's go ahead and work on that a little bit. Okay, so here is our piece that was made from scratch, and paint-wise, I kind of caught up with where we were on the other one. I used the same process, and I can show you how this is very flat here, but you can get a very believable three-dimensional effect very easily. Let's go and do that first, and then we'll go on to dealing with this up here. So the main thing I want to do is I want to switch over to, whereas this was the ultra matte paint or the flat paint, I want to switch over to some gloss paint. I'm going with a gloss black. I know these are not paints that I originally said you needed, but if you're going this route, you will need some sort of gloss paint as well. So I've just got some black gloss, and I have some white gloss. This is the only gloss white that I have, so it's not like the others. But it'll work fine for this. And I'm just going to spray these into some containers like I did before. Obviously 2 different containers, and I don't need very much paint. Also, I've got just a little plastic baggie here. I just want to use that because I'm not using very much paint, and this is very thin paint, so I don't want it to soak into anything. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a pencil, and I'm going to draw sort of the area that I want to paint in here. It's a 1/4 of an inch rectangle that starts, a 1/2 of an inch from the bottom. So I guess the obvious thing to do is I'm just going to measure and mark 1/2 of an inch with my pencil. And then I'm not going to be super precise about this. I'm just going to find my mark that I just made. That's it right there, I think. It looked like a piece of chipped paint for a second. And just using this method I've used on several other occasions. I'm going to put my middle finger here and I'm going to hold that pencil lead where I want it, and then from there I can make a line that is parallel with the bottom. And in this case, instead of measuring to the top, I'm just going to use my eye to sort of put it the same distance from the top as that line is from the bottom. So it looks to be about there. And then I'm just going to close this in. It's not an equal distance to the ends here. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch in from the sides. Now I'm going to just take a fine brush and I'm going to get some of this white paint and kind of collect it onto this piece of plastic bag. And then I'm going to take some of this black, gloss black, not very much. It doesn't take very much black to darken up a color. You could probably get away with white, but white's going to be extremely intense. So I think a gray is a little better choice. And then I'm going to try to just follow along that bottom edge that we just drew on there. And it's not going to be great. Or not going to be perfect, I'll say that. Now I'm going to err in the direction of, I don't want any of the gray to get below that line, but it can get above it. So basically that's all fine. Because even though that's definitely not a fine line, it's all above the line that I drew. Now I'm just going to give that maybe 5 minutes to dry and we'll fix it. Okay, now using a slightly wider brush, I'm going to get some of the gloss black paint and I'm going to thin this thick jagged line up. And what I like to do is I'd like it to be quite thin here in the middle and then get thicker on each end. And you don't need to try to do this in one shot. It's kind of like sketching. We're just going to slowly work our way into that shape. I'm also trying to do this so that you can see it. And you can clean up the bottom of that gray line as well, but you want to make sure that you use the matte black for that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill in the rest of that rectangle that I drew earlier. It's not going to be noticeable at all, but the way it reflects the light compared to the rest of the black will help to sell that there's a difference there. You won't really notice it, but your brain will kind of pick up on that suggestion that there's some kind of a difference there. In this case, hopefully that'll, that it's a little bit further away than the rest of the black. You can just kind of creep up on getting to the line. Okay, and the truth is that will work just the way it is there. Maybe a little bit thick here on the front edge. See if we can thin that up just a little bit more. It's hard for me to see because the glossiness of the paint was reflecting the light right back into my eye. Now I'm going to wipe most of that black off of my brush, and I'm going to just kind of brush very lightly over the middle of this. What I would like to do is make it where it fades from being bright on the ends to being not very bright in the middle. And I might be rushing this just a little bit because some of this paint is still wet. Yeah, I think maybe we should give this another couple of minutes. Although it's not doing badly, we should give that just a couple of minutes to dry a little bit better. Because I'm afraid that when I start getting in here, it's just going to pull some of that wet paint down and cover the lineup completely. So we'll give it another minute or two. Okay, now that is a little bit more dry, I'm just going to take a piece of scrap paper here, and I've got my paint, and I'm just going to wipe it off until there's not very much paint left. And now I'm just going to try and make this more of a blend. And it's not going to be a perfectly smooth, it's going to be a little splotchy, but that's totally fine. Okay, it's looking pretty good. And it's not much of anything that I just did, but let's compare that with the real thing. Here is this, and here is one that I have not painted. You know, this is just literally does have the indentation in there, and they look pretty similar. You could make it the same all the way across. Maybe that'd be better, I don't know. I like this because it's always gonna help sell the roundness of it no matter what angle you're at. You know, if I wanted to match this, I would probably start with one end and make it just fade into just being black at the other end. But that only reads from this angle. If you see it from this angle over here, it's gonna not look the same. So I think that totally works. You can see some of the ones that I did on the other side. Once you get both sides, it really sells it. But just do that 4 times all the way around and you'll be there. Now let's work on this top part. Okay, the first thing you want to do is you can kind of feel the cuts that we made in here in the washer. So you can mark those and then draw a line to connect them. And that will give you your center point. Then take a compass and set it to 9/16 of an inch, or about 14 millimeters. And I'm going to push this into the center and draw a circle around here. Afraid all the extra paint that I've put on there is not had 48 hours to cure, and it's not particularly hard, I'll put it that way. Yeah, I'm going to change that. Okay, I would make that set your compass to 1/2 of an inch, or about 12 to 12.5 millimeters. Next, you want to take a flimsy ruler that can handle that curve, and I want to measure from that center point again up 1 1/8 of an inch, or about 29 millimeters. It's actually a little easier to do it if you don't start at the end of the ruler. It helps if your ruler is not 30 years old. Okay, 1 1/8. Put a mark there. I'm going to measure 1 1/8 inches, and I'm going to cut a piece of paper. Okay, so here's my piece of paper that is 1 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to do the bottom as well. Now remember that because the piece of the funnel that we used, and this was too large, so the ball sits too far down into it. So we're not going to be able to get this whole thing at the bottom. But you would if you use the right part of the funnel. If you'll recall, this is just a piece that I had left over. I'm definitely going to mess up the entire paint job that we just did down here. So when you do it, make sure that you leave ample time for your paint to dry. I'm trying to think of a clever way to do this, but I'm not getting an answer. Okay, and then you want to measure out each side from each one of those lines 1/4 of an inch. And then I want to connect each one of those lines across here as well. And don't make these really dark lines because the ends may go past where you're painting. Probably go back and just use the other edge. So basically, it's easier to deal with the curves here if you put your piece of paper in the middle and do one on one side, one on the other. If you try to get way out here on the side here, there's so much of a curve that's different in relation to that, it's going to be really difficult to get a straight line there. Okay, we definitely have some issues there. My center line doesn't match up at all with those other two lines. So I just measured up 1/4 of an inch from the middle point, which is 6 millimeters. And I'm just making sure that that is sort of the middle point between these other two marks. So now all I need to do is to basically, I mean, you could get real perfectionist and get a round template out here and stuff, but I'm just going to start with my mark that I made originally, and I'm just going to make a curved line that connects all of these together. You don't want it to be overly curved, just so that it comes up and then isn't straight across, it has a bit of a curve. And unfortunately, it wouldn't be, I don't believe, let me just take a look and see. Yeah, it's not. So unfortunately, it's going to be more of a curve than it would be if I just took my compass and made a big circle here. That would be not curved enough. Okay. And now you just need to paint in those lines with the matte black paint, not the gloss. And to do that, I'm going to use that slightly wider brush. And because I didn't wait a full 48 hours from when I painted this gray on here, it's mixing with the black a little bit. You won't have that problem because you will have waited the full 48 hours. Okay, so that's the sort of the cross part. There's also this part here. We did it as a circle. In reality, it's actually straight edges. It's an octagon. So if you want, you can go out to the outside edge of that circle, but then make it a straight line. Okay, I'm gonna give that a couple of minutes and then I'll put another coat on. Okay, I went ahead and cleaned up some of the gray as well. And I think that looks pretty good, especially if you compare it with the one that is actually the right shape and everything and has all the indentions and all that kind of stuff. And if you wanted to, you could do the same thing we did here. You could do that same treatment on sort of the lower edge of all of these. And I would probably pick maybe the inside edge on each side to do the same treatment to. And that would help to sell the three-dimensional aspect of it, but it's really not necessary. Just something if you wanted to take that extra step. But all in all, I think that looks pretty darn good. But that's how I would go about doing this piece, and I think it turned out quite well. Now we can actually set all of these aside and get on with the actual jetpack. Okay, so actually there is one last thing that we need to do on these thrusters before we can move on to doing other things. And that is we have to deal with this inside here. Now, I don't have any idea what the actual prop looks like on the inside. I've seen some photos, but I don't know if they're actually the prop or not. But they seem to just be a kind of like this, just a kind of a gray metallic finish on the inside. But what I do know is what an actual inside of a bell for a rocket engine actually looks like. And it's not this. And I want to go ahead and go with the actual appearance of a rocket engine. Here are some images right here of quite a few rocket engines. In fact, these are Raptor engines. And you can see, first of all, that none of them look exactly the same, which is good. So we don't have to try to match exactly the same thing on two different thrusters. They're all different, but they do have some similarities. If you'll notice, they all start out in the very center is black. And then you have sort of a white, ashy white ring that covers sort of the middle area, and then there'll be another black area, sort of a ring on top of that, and then the very end of the thruster is sort of a whitish light gray ring that's on the very outside part. So we can definitely reproduce that. Now, some of these in the image have sort of a sharp line. I think that's going to be hard to produce. That's not going to look artificial. I think we're going to go with some of the ones where it's more feathered and streaky. I think those are going to have the best chance of looking right for our thrusters. And that's the effect that we're going to do here. Also, we have this plate right here that's fairly shallow compared to those. So I think also where we kind of feather out those lines instead of being a sharp line is going to help this look more real. We can kind of hide how shallow this is. And the first thing we need to do is we need to sand everything. Doesn't matter whether or not, in this case, I've got it all painted silver, but even if you haven't painted anything at all on it, we need to do some sanding here. And if you try to use, a big sanding stick, you're going to get like a sharp edge here and a sharp edge on, each side of this because of the curvature isn't going to work right. So I've just taken sanding sticks and I've cut them into some little skinny parts. And unfortunately, I've tried every thing that I can think of, every kind of little sanding device that I have access to, and none of them fit in here in a smooth manner. You know, like a Dremel's gonna do lots of horizontal, and what we're trying to do here is to make sure that all of our imperfections are up and down. We don't want anything that's, you know, going in a circle. And in order to do this, it's pretty straightforward. You just take a regular sanding stick and an X-Acto knife. And I took a straight edge and did the first pass with the straight edge. But after that, you just want to go back over it. And it's just going to take a lot of passes. And you'll find that you'll finally cut through in one area first, and then you can kind of start in those areas and work your way out. It just takes a lot of passes. And if you notice, I can feel that I've cut almost all the way through right in here. So I can just kind of go from that area where I've cut all the way through and pull out, and then I'll flip it around and go the other direction. Okay. Okay. Just be very careful whenever you're pushing down that hard and working that hard. It's going to be really easy for you to slip and cut yourself. So be very wary of where your fingers are in relation to where you're cutting, and just, you know, be very careful. And this is either going to dull your X-Acto knife or sharpen it. I'm not sure which one. So just take your very small piece of a sanding stick, and I'm not going to worry about this center section here. I just want the sides. And I'm not trying to smooth everything out. I just want to make sure that anything that is a scratch that's going this way is no longer visible, and that all the scratches are, you know, on its way out. I have my handy little sandpaper cleaner. You can see some of these areas where I've got these horizontal structures, and those are what I want to make vertical. I really don't need to get all of this paint off. Like I said before, I just want to make sure that there's no scratches that are going this direction. All the scratches need to be going up and down. And that should be good enough. I don't see any. There's some way down here at the bottom. You can see these little scratches here that are going like that. Okay, that looks pretty good. I think we can just get this cleaned up really good. I'm going to go get some. I'm going to blow this out with my compressor, and then I'm going to take a washcloth or, you know, a rag with some denatured alcohol and just wipe everything off to get any dust out of there that I can. This should be nice and dust free now, and you can do like we did with the jetpack itself and spray some of your spray paint into a container, or what I've got here is some oil-based Rust-Oleum flat black, just regular paint. And I find that a brush works better for this. I tried on the prototype using the spray cans to get a nice fuzzy nice blend in there, which it does a very nice blend. The problem with it is it's just too wide. I think maybe a handheld airbrush could do it, but I know most people don't have access to an airbrush, so I'm not going to go that route. We're going to go with brushing. And I've already done the other thruster, so I have some paint brushes here in some, it's just in mineral spirits, and they're a little dirty because I've already done this on the other thruster. And the first thing we're going to do is we just want to take flat black. It needs to be flat. And we're just going to paint the entire inside of this with flat black. If yours is like this one and has all of these little rings in there, make sure you get the whole ring. I stirred this up earlier, but I think I'm going to stir it up and get a little bit more. My black has been kind of abused. And if you're going to have brush strokes, try to get them to go, from the center of this out. Okay, now we need to wait for this to completely dry, and for this paint, unlike the spray paint, we just need to wait 24 hours before we can put another coat on. So let's wait 24 hours and then we can go on with the rest of the process. It hasn't quite been 24 hours on the thruster, but while we're waiting for that to completely dry, let's go ahead and work on this piece, which is the other piece we have to attach to the jetpack. So I've got this chucked into my drill again, and what I want to do first of all is I want to put some lines on here. I don't have to worry about the top, but I do want to mark first of all where this angle changes right here, so where the top cap part would be. Okay, so now I'm not going to actually measure this, but just in my head, I'm going to divide this space into 4 parts that are kind of evenly spaced, visually anyway. Okay, I don't know if you can actually see that. Turn this light off, see if that helps at all. Okay, and now that I have that marked with the sort of the base of this and then 4 lines, it's going to take it out of the drill. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's actually aim down here. I'm going to take a little bit of my tape, and you don't have to use the skinny tape. You can, if you just have regular masking tape, you can use that as well. I do want to make sure that I'm putting this down as straight as possible. Luckily, this has little lines that I can use. If you don't have a table like this, then I would suggest just taking a pencil and lightly drawing a straight line. And I want to mark 1/8 of an inch, which is half of this piece of tape. And I'm not doing it at the very ends because when I was putting this tape down, I've noticed that the ends kind of curved a little bit. Can't see my mark there. Let me turn the light back on. Yeah, now I can see it. And I just want to cut that into a strip that is 1/8 of an inch wide. And I'm not trying to be super accurate with any of this. I just want to get it to where it looks right. Now, looking from above, I want to line this up right through the middle and run this down the sides, making sure that everything stays straight with, everything. So looking down, this all looks like it's in a line across and then down. And then I will do 90 degrees to that. And now using a pen, or you can use a brush and black paint, but it's hard to keep a consistent width of line when you do that. So I find that a pen is just a little bit easier. And I'm not going to draw in this bottom line, although you could, because in the real prop there is a, this top part is like a cap, and you can see that it is separate. But basically I just want to draw in the line between the pieces of tape. And you know what? I think I'm going to go with the drill again. Let's just make sure that the tape sticks on really well. And a little bit thicker marker would be a good choice on this, like a regular Sharpie width. But I'll just have to make these a little bit thicker because they should be actually end up with the lines being actually a little bit thicker than the silver that's in between them. And I'm going to change the direction on that. The lines themselves should actually be about 1/16 of an inch thick, which is, I guess, maybe, 0.75 millimeters, something like that. But the main thing is you just want to make sure that the black is slightly bigger than the silver part. Okay, now with that done, I can just peel these off. And this would look better if, like I'd said originally, if I had gone in and primed and filler primered this wood before I painted it silver. Then you wouldn't see all of that, the little pits everywhere. And if you want to at this point, you could go ahead and draw that bottom line in. There is the finished beacon if you want to go this route. Like I said, just make sure that you filler primer and primer the wood after you make it, before you paint it silver, because otherwise you end up with those little wood grain pits in there. But I think that's definitely usable. Now I'll give the thruster about 3 more hours to cure, and then we'll be back working on that. Okay, it's been 24 hours, so we can go ahead and continue to work on this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add some white on here. So we kind of had the soot in place, and now we're going to add some ash. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry brush this. So I've got some cardboard here that I can dip into the white paint, which you can't see. But then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to wipe most of it off to where there's just a little bit of white showing. And I'm going to come into here, and I'm going for this corner where the flat piece meets up with the sides. I'm going to hit that and then just pull up. And we're going to have to build it up. You don't want to go with a lot of paint. We can go a little more than what we have there, but We only want to go up about maybe a half of an inch. If it goes a little higher than that, it's okay, because we're going to come back. I mean, we're going to keep refining this. But I will say it's easy to go out the end of the thruster. Going from the inside, from the outside in is difficult. However, going from this corner in toward the middle is also easy. So we load up the brush, we wipe most of it off. So into the corner and then up about a half of an inch. The furthest you want to go up is about 3/4 of an inch. But for the most part, you want to go about a half of an inch. Try to go in straight lines. I keep doing this curve. You don't want that. It's a little bit easier if you hold it like this and then come toward you. That was a very painted part. You just keep going around. It's okay to be inconsistent. That's one of the best parts of this. But I really kind of like this more jagged edge side than I do this, which is very even. Next, we want to do the very same thing, but the other direction. With this one, we've got these concentric rings. And if yours is like this, you've got rings that are about, I don't know, 3/16 of an inch, which is, almost 4 millimeters. So if you don't have those rings, you just want to come in that far. And I'm basically going to paint those solid white. But I still want to do it, I'm not on camera, but I still want to do it in a way that is, starting in that corner and coming out, or in toward the middle. I'm having to go sideways to get into that corner, but then I'm going to pull in. The problem that you're going to find is that it has a tendency to remove paint as well as put it down, which is the reason why we waited a full 24 hours to put this second color layer on. Because it's like the surface dries and gets kind of tacky, but the underside isn't dry yet, so it'll pull off. And you don't want a lot of paint on for this, but you don't want to dry brush this either. You really want to get in here and kind of paint this first ledge solid white. And we'll go on with several other coats to sort of build up some of this color. So where this is solid white, but the sides aren't, once again, you're not, let me put my arm over here, it might help. So yeah, we're making this solid white, but the sides aren't solid white. We're going to go back later and add a little bit more white in there. You might have to do a little bit of tapping here instead of brushing to get the paint on and get it to stay. And after that, we want to go back to the dry brushing. And we're just, this second layer, which is the second 3/16 of an inch, we do want to sort of hit that and pull in. In fact, for this, it's probably better to go with a smaller brush. So I'm kind of punching it into the little corner of the two different rings and then pulling in toward the middle. The idea being that we want this ring to be sort of a fade from white to black. If you get too much white on here, that's okay, because we're going to come back later with black and kind of go the opposite direction. Although it's a lot easier to go this way than it is to go from the center out. And you can do this while you're painting other things. Once you get the sort of the outside colors done on the thrusters and they're adequately dried, you may still be painting those, other colors on the jetpack. So while that's drying, you can, come in and work on the thrusters. Also, after you dry brush, you can go back with your brush over the areas that you wiped the paint off. You don't have to always get a full load of paint. So like what I did here is I just reached over to where I had wiped most of the paint off and kind of scooped up some paint onto my brush. I apologize, it's really hard for me to paint this and pay attention to what's actually on the screen. Okay, once we get a reasonable amount of that done, kind of like that, we're going to come back to go the harder direction, which is from the outside in. And we only want to come in, like a quarter of an inch. You can go a little bit more than that, it's going to be okay. This one doesn't have to be as white. Gray would be just fine here. And this will look a lot better once the paint dries and is matte. Okay, and that is good enough for this layer. Now we're going to let this dry for 24 hours. I might go over it just a little bit to make it a little bit more consistent. But for that, we have that, and let's let this dry for 24 hours. And then we'll go on and put some black back in here, and we'll add some white in here to make it a little brighter in the center. But if I try to do that now, it's going to pull up as much paint as it's putting down. So we'll go ahead and wait 24 hours and put another coat on. Now that this is completely dry, let's go ahead and do another coat of white. This time what I'm mostly concerned with is making this a more opaque white, especially right here in the middle near the angle where it goes from the sides to the bottom here. In this corner right here, I want to make sure that's opaque and then feathered out toward these edges here. I've got some new brushes because my other cheap brushes over the last several days have basically dissolved in my mineral spirits. So I'm not dry brushing at this point. I'm just getting, quite a lot of paint into this corner. You want to work fast here because I don't want this paint to dry with that sort of sharp edge across there. Okay, now that I have that, I can make sure that I don't have too much paint on the brush, and I can start feathering back up. Definitely better to go from the corner up than the other way around. So back to dry brushing here. Just kind of wiggling the brush around, trying to break up that little line that's forming there. Okay, now I'm just going to dry brush this upper area again. And when you go up like that, you have a tendency to make a little horizontal lines where your brush first touches. And I don't want those. I'm kind of getting down into the black too much, but that's okay. Because now I'm going to go back to the black and I'm going to go black feathered up. Dry brushing the whole time here. I'm just trying to break up this kind of a big flat area here on the white. Now I have one of those old brushes that I intentionally did not clean in an earlier episode. So it's just kind of chunky and it's not particularly good. I'm going to load it up and then once again wipe most of it off. I would say you could try going down as well, but I don't know how much luck we're going to have with that. I just want to try to make sure that I'm going straight down and not getting any kind of curves in there. Okay, that actually looks pretty good there. I'm pretty happy with that. So now I just have to wait until tomorrow, another 24 hours, and then we've got one last little step we're going to do on that, and we'll be done with the thrusters. Okay, it's the next day, and even though this is matte paint, it's not quite flat as I would like it to be. So I'm going to hit it with some matte spray. And I like this right here. It's the Model Master Lacquer Overcoat Lusterless or Flat. It comes in these little bitty cans. It's usually in the model section of a hobby store. And it's just a very, very flat matte. And you just spray this on, give it a nice glossy coat when you first put it on, but then when it dries very matte. Now you might ask yourself, what if I'm not doing, this thruster? What if I'm doing the thrusters that we made from scratch? Well, you're going to do the exact same thing. These are a little bit deeper than the ones that I've got here. And I started to make all of the white just on the sides, but in the end I did the same thing. I went down to the corner and blended the white. Now I didn't do as much on here as I did on the actual one, but I was just kind of practicing with some things here. But I find that it worked the best to go ahead and do the exact same thing with this one as we did with that one. And here is our other thruster. And you can see that it's not quite the same, but it's very similar. And it doesn't have to be the same because, like we saw in the photograph of all the different thrusters, all the different rocket engines, that even the same rocket engine doesn't have the same pattern every time. So this is going to work just fine. Now, while I was working on this, I was also working on the jetpack itself and doing some work on that. So let's go back and look at some of the stuff that I was working on while I was waiting for this stuff to dry. So a lot of this video is just going to be me tying up some loose ends. And one of those loose ends is that a lot of our silver, where we painted the silver back on top of where we peeled off the paint, is much shinier than the stuff where we just peeled off the paint. So to fix that, well, we're simply just going to paint on some more of the masking fluid, and we'll let it completely dry. We'll wait, maybe a few hours, maybe 24 hours, and then we'll just peel it off, and we should get the same amount of matte finish that it had when we peeled off the paint. At least that's the theory. Let's see how it works. And to do that, I'm just going to take some of the masking fluid and paint it on. Now it is possible that when I peel off this masking fluid, it's going to take off some of the blue paint where I've gotten it on there, but that's just a risk we're going to have to take. And worst comes to worst, I may have to paint some blue paint back on here. That shouldn't really be a problem. There's a little piece here and there that is still shiny that I don't hit with this. That's totally fine. It's really more the larger areas where part of it is shiny and part of it's not that I'm worried about. If one of these little pieces down here is shiny, I don't think that's going to be a problem. And realistically, you'd have some dings that were older than others. I'm getting to where I'm not sure what I've hit and what I haven't. I think this is going to do it. And we'll just let this dry and we'll come back in a couple of hours and take a look at it. It's been about 2 hours, so let's see if this is working at all. And I don't know for sure this is going to work. I'm just kind of, I think this has worked. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't work, but let's see if it works. I think I may have to use do one of the bigger ones just so I can see. Actually, you have to get the angle where the light's reflecting right. I think that did work. At first I thought it didn't, but once I get the right angle, it does look more like armor and less like chrome. I'm gonna try turning these lights off. Yeah, I think that's actually done it. Well, that one might not have been quite so successful. So maybe I give this another couple hours. I think I'm gonna put some more masking fluid on there, and then maybe I'll give it the night to cure, and we'll check back in the morning. So that sounds like a plan. I'm gonna put some back on those areas, and I mean, that one seemed to work, but maybe I'll put it on anyway. So I'll recover those and we'll check back in the morning. Good morning. I guess it's time to take a look and see if giving this the little stint overnight was enough to take some of the shine off of this. And if it doesn't, I think we'll probably have to change our approach here. Once again, I think it did work there. This was the one that looked like it was a little different. And there is still a little bit different in the color. I think I'm just gonna go ahead and take off everything and see how it looks in general. It's a little of both. It's definitely better, but at the same time, I can see, depending on how the light hits it, I can see where the different pieces were painted, or, you know, this was painted earlier and then this was painted later. Without there being any paint over the top of it, it's easy to find. I can just run my hand over here, and where it kind of grips onto the sort of latex rubber, I can feel it. Okay, so it did something, but I'm not sure it quite did what I wanted it to do, which was to make this, especially this area here, look more uniform. And at the same time, I'm not sure I would even notice if I didn't know that I painted that on separately. Let's try one last thing. Okay, so I just have some dulling spray. This is just sort of a matte spray, and I'm going to just spray a little bit on here and see what happens. I don't want to saturate it, I just want to get a little bit on there. If I get too much on here, this is just going to turn into a sort of a light gray color. I'm tempted to put more on, but I think I should just wait and see what that looks like. We'll take another look in about 10 minutes. Let's take a look and see what this looks like now. Yeah, I think that did the trick. I can still see a tiny difference here, but once I go in and dirty this up a little bit, I think that'll be gone. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'd say you can go ahead and do, you know, if you go in and paint some silver on here, but it looks separate. Overall, I think it works well to just use the masking fluid on top of it. That did take it down to a more matte finish. But if you're still seeing some separate areas, so like I think it worked fine here and down here and up here, but this area was a little different. So if you're finding that you need to do a little bit more, just hit it with some matte spray. Like I said, don't get too heavy with it, just because this can just turn into a gray. If you take the shine out of the metallic paint, it just becomes gray. But so we've got the thrusters, we've got the beacon, we've taken care of all the silver, so that pretty much just leaves dealing with this top part of the rocket. So let's see about taking care of that. Before we paint the top of the rocket, I almost forgot about one last little thing here. And we need to deal with, there should be a black stripe through here. And to do that, I'm going to be using my 6mm tape. And I want this to be a thinner stripe than the other stripes. At the very least, I want it to be thinner than this stripe here. So I'm going to make it a 1/2 inch stripe, or about 12mm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 6mm tape and I'm going to run it all the way around right up against where this flare is here. And now I'm going to run another line of tape directly below that one. That is 5/16. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my thicker tape, and much like we did when we were painting the other beacon, I'm going to just lay a strip of tape out there, measure and cut it so that it is 5/16 of an inch, which is just a tiny bit less than 8mm. So 8mm would work fine. So basically I'll have a strip of tape that is this, precisely this size. So I'm gonna go cut a piece of 5/16 inch tape and I'll be right back. So just like before, when I was doing the other version of the beacon, I had a perfectly straight line on my cutting board. I lined my thicker piece of tape up along that line, measured 5/16 of an inch, made the cut. So now I have this piece, and I suppose at this point I can really remove this piece of tape. And I'm going to put this on the bottom down here. You really shouldn't have to do all these measurements. You should just be able to put a 6mm or 1/4 inch piece of tape along this bottom edge of this bevel here, and then run this piece of tape that is 5/16 of an inch across the bottom. And that should give you the right size. Now I can remove this piece of tape. So now I just have my my 1/4 inch piece of tape coming down from the top, my 5/16 coming up from the bottom, and this is going to be the space in the middle here that's going to be my black line. I'm going to use this same flat black spray paint, or flat black paint that I used on the thrusters. You can use that, or you can use the same black spray paint to just spray it into a container, so you can use a brush, or you can mask this off like this when you're doing the rest of the black, which is probably the smartest thing to do. I had just forgotten that I had this ready to go. So the smart thing to do would be to go ahead and paint this at the same time you do your other stripes, or you can, make the same mistakes as me and follow along and do it this way. If you're going to brush it on, try to make it smooth. Okay, I'm going to give this a couple of hours to dry to the touch, and then I'll peel the tape off. Sorry, I thought I was filming before, but apparently I turned off the camera instead of turning it on or something. But all I did to mask this off is this is a trash bag, and one of the bottom corners I cut a hole that was big enough, for this widest part to fit. And I just slid that down and then put tape across the top of this to hold it in place, and then just kept going around with tape so that the top of this was completely masked off and it was holding the trash bag in place. So that's all masked off and ready to go. For the paint, I went back and forth between the red and this copper, and I just decided I don't like the way the red looks. The versions of the jetpack that are painted with red, I just don't like the way it looks. So I'm going with the version of the jetpacks that are painted with this copper color. And what I'm using is this Rust-Oleum Bright Coat metallic finish, and the color is Bright Coat Copper. And to find it, you have to look just above the barcode. It's written out Bright Coat Copper. And this is much like the other paints. I'm going to put on 2 coats, just a couple of minutes apart, and then we'll wait 24 hours for it to completely dry. Let's go ahead and put this on. Okay, I'm going to let this wait about 5 minutes, and then we might put another coat on. We might not need to. I mean, it looks pretty solid there, so I think probably that's good enough, but we'll take a look at it in about 5 minutes. It's been about 4 minutes, and I think the copper looks fine. I don't think we need to add any more copper on here, but I'm going to do something a little bit crazy, I think. I've got some of the claret wine red that we used for the jetpack. I'm going to see if I can just dust that a little bit along the very bottom down here around. This might be a mistake, but we'll see. I mean, if worst comes to worst, I can just hit it with copper again. But I'm way back here. I just wanted to add a little bit of something different than just being pure copper, just to add some of the confusion that I've been feeling about whether or not this is copper or red. And I'm going to hit this with black in the next video anyway, so I think this is going to be fine. It's just something that's a little bit different, kind of feeds in a little bit of both the copper and the red versions. And I kind of like it. I think we're good with that, and in a couple of hours we'll go ahead and take the masking off. Okay, it's been about an hour and a half, and this should be okay to touch. Let's go ahead and take off all of the masking here. Okay, that is all of the painting that we need to do on the jetpack. I am not going to peel off the masking fluid just yet. First of all, I want to give it a full 24 hours for the paint to dry before I do that. And I'm also thinking that I might actually wait until I do some of the weathering on it, because, and this is kind of the confusing part, the rocket really shouldn't have any damage on it, even though it has a ton of damage on it. It really shouldn't, because it is an expendable item. It's a rocket that is fired to blow things up from the jetpack. So why is it on there and so old that it's got dings and stuff on it? It should be brand new all the time. But the prop has damage on it. So I think at the very least it shouldn't have as much weathered damage. It should all be new damage, like somehow it was caused by him sliding down some rocks or something. So either way, I think I'll go ahead and weather everything, get it dirty, and then I'll peel off all the masking fluid so that it'll at least be clean damage and not dirty damage, if that makes any sense. Or maybe I'll do a little bit of both, I don't know. But even with that being all of the paint that we need to do, there is one last thing that we need to do before we can call this thing completely assembled, and that is we have to put the thrusters and the end caps on the bottom. So we just take our lag screws, line it in where we originally drilled it out, and hopefully it will line up where we had it originally. Got a short, well, in my case it's an 11 millimeter for this lag screw, but you know, whatever the appropriate lag screw size socket is. Okay, once it becomes rigid, you don't want to make it too tight after that. Just give me a little bit of a look, make sure everything looks good. It is solid. Now we can put this end cap on. And ideally what we want is we want this red stripe to be a 1/2 inch wide. And what we have on here is a 1/4 inch wide. So I've just measured from this end a 1/4 inch in, and I've marked it with the micrometer. On the other one, I just took, you know, like I've done in the past, I took a marker, I held it in place and just, you know, ran my finger along that edge to give me the straight edge to mark it at a 1/4 inch. So find a nice, you know, side that looks good, and we're gonna push it in. One thing that I did not mention earlier in the build, and that is when I cut these out, I was accidentally using the aluminum tubing from the prototype, which is slightly smaller than the aluminum tubing that I used on this jetpack. So these are looser than I really had wanted them to be. Now there are several ways you can go about attaching this, or these on. I've decided that I want to put a tiny little screw in here to hold it in place. Now that's going to be a visible screw, I'm afraid, which means I'll probably have to paint it red. I'll have to go back no matter what with a brush and paint red in here anyway, just to get rid of that line. I'm going to go in with a tiny little screw to hopefully lock this in place. I don't have a lot of space here. We're talking maybe 3/8 of an inch. So when I say, yeah, like 3/8 of an inch down here, it's got to go into that part. So when I say a tiny little screw, I really mean a tiny little screw. Hopefully this will work. Originally I was thinking that what I wanted to do was to glue this in using some E6000 or something like that. And if this doesn't work, I'll still go that route. But the ability to take this out if I want to seems like a pretty good thing. So I'm gonna at least try to make this where I can screw it in place. And ideally, you know, if these would pivot, I would, you know, pivot that out of the way and put it right here on the side so it was hidden by the thruster. But I didn't make these where they would pivot because I think they look bad when they're not straight up and down. And so often I see them sort of out of position on people's jetpacks, and I think it looks bad. So that kind of sounds like a cop-out, but that was my actual thinking as to why these don't pivot. So I'm getting it as close to the edge as I can. Okay, so I just have a center punch here. Apparently I'm gonna have to put this back in position now. And this is my smallest drill bit. Ideally, I would like it to be much longer, but because it's my smallest drill bit, it I don't have a long version. I want to be really careful that I'm not grinding away on the thruster itself. I'm going to go on the slow speed. Take that off just so I don't have to worry about it. Now let's line this up one more time. Now hopefully we can drill into the end cap. Now the hole that I just drilled is a little small for this screws, but hopefully since it's aluminum, it will cut in. No, I don't think it's going to, so I'm going to pull this out again. Before I do that, I am going to mark that, because now that I have the hole drilled in it, I need to make sure that it lines up in the exact same place again. The hole this makes will be so large that the threads will not touch it. So I cannot drill this into the end cap here. I can only drill it into the aluminum. Okay, at least I can check the hole placement on that and it looks pretty good. Okay, let's try this one last time. Now, the biggest problem that I think we have at this point is borne out when I tried to remove that screw and it just twisted this piece. But I still think I would like this to be removable in case I ever need to take these thrusters off for some reason. Trying to get around this thruster, I came in at a weird angle. So this isn't going perpendicular to the side of the tube, it's kind of running in at an angle, and that right there really bothers me. If I can tighten this up, hopefully that won't be an issue. It is definitely not as tight as I would have hoped. The fix would be to put one in over here as well, but I prefer not to have a visible screw right there. But if I paint it red, it might not be so bad. Okay, I found enough small screws, so I'm gonna go ahead and do it. I'm gonna put in another screw over here. Hopefully that'll be, I don't know, I'm second guessing myself right now. If I put one on here, it still might rotate this direction. Although since it's not directly across, it might be enough to stop that from happening. So let's go ahead and give it a try. I'm going to go ahead and start off with the bit that is the same size as the screw, so the threads will not cut into the aluminum at all, but I don't want to get into the resin underneath it. Now I'm going to switch over to the small one, make sure this is in the right place. Okay, now it's going. Okay, and that is secure. It's not trying to rotate or anything. Well, there's a little bit of movement. If I tried to, I could probably rotate that a little bit, but there's no reason why you would. So obviously I need to go in with some red paint and hit that screw and then hit this line on the end of the aluminum tube. But other than that, that is in. So all there is left on this is for me to go ahead and repeat the process on the other side. And then we'll come back and take one last look at this. And there we have it, the fully assembled jetpack. This has been, like I've said before, tying up all the loose ends that were all over the jetpack, but it's all one unit now. Everything's been dealt with, and all we have left is to dirty it up. Right now it's scratched and dented, but surprisingly completely clean, which gives it a little surreal look to it. Now's the time that I can ask you to go ahead and subscribe. If you've watched this whole video and you're this far into it and you haven't subscribed, really? I mean, that's kind of crazy. So yeah, subscribe, like the video, please leave a comment if you can. And in the next video, we're gonna go ahead and dirty everything up. We're gonna add all the dirt and grime and soot that brings this to life. But until then, let me just say, thanks.